all is one. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, click the link on the bottom right, click the notification bell, and then you'll also be notified when I upload new content. So here I'm going to talk about Advaita Vedanta, Shankara's interpretation of the Upanishads. And this is the idea that there is no separation. Advaita is translated in the West as non-dualism. Advaita, ad means not, and vaita means two. Not two. We have in the Hindu philosophy Atman and Brahman, which is an interesting dance between the one supreme Godhead, the one supreme reality being Brahman, and the Atman is the individualized holding of that within the person. So this could be likened to the soul or the spirit within each individual. And Shankara's philosophy of Advaita Vedanta is pointing to the fact that Atman and Brahman are the same. And this was and is a radical proposal that has many shapes and forms of understanding. This is the same understanding that perhaps you could describe as consciousness being the ultimate reality. Everything is born out of consciousness. Here we're replacing Brahman with the word consciousness. In a previous video on Brahman, I did highlight the difference between Niguna Brahman, and this is the idea that the ultimate reality is indefinable, unmanifested, invisible, and not materialized, which gives us nothing to hold on to. And then Saguna Brahman is a different way of personifying the ultimate reality and assigning it with attributes. Sankara would argue in the philosophy of Advaita, in the philosophy of non-duality, that as soon as you assign attributes, you are imposing Maya, which is illusion, upon the ultimate reality, onto Brahman, because Brahman does not have qualities. One can understand why, if you want to follow a path, you need something to hold on to, because being undefinable, unmanifest, invisible, and not materialized leaves you with nothing, literally no thing, and that's a very hard place to begin a journey within, or to look out into the world to find a underlying reality, because it gives you nothing to hold on to. And so it is understandable why another path that the Hindus would suggest is worthy of exploring is the Saguna Brahman, which personifies Brahman in human form. And in the video I mentioned in a little bit more detail about the Bhagavad Gita's story, where of course that personification comes in the form of Krishna, who advises Arjuna in the battle of his life. So Atman is a Hindu word that means soul or spirit. And so it's referring to the universal self inside an individual. So straight away we are creating a dual perspective, a duality. We can't help but do that if we start to talk about these matters and philosophize and work out, because we need to use concepts, construct, and we need to talk about form, and we need to share that description with language, so that universal self inside the individual, or soul or spirit, is seen as part of the Brahman, the ultimate reality that underlies all phenomena. So it is the same, Atman is Brahman, the individual soul is the same as the universal soul, but for the purposes of inquiry we need something to hold on to, we need some basis upon which to start to try and make sense of life and of our life, because it's quite clear that we act in the world as individual people. But again, the non-dual perspective, the Advaita perspective, is Nirvana Brahman, beyond or without attributes. And this is a state where the so-called individual is at peace and still. Nothing needs to be changed. Nothing needs to be added to or taken away, because in that place of beingness, and again we're going to use words here clearly, I have no choice, in that place of pure conscious awareness, of peace, stillness, of the empty mind, then there is no striving. There is nothing needed there, because everything is perfectly at peace and everything is exactly as it should be. That feels like, and obviously sounds like, it's in conflict with what we see when we look out into the world, because clearly that doesn't seem to be what's unfolding in front of us. This time in history is no different to other times in history. There is always conflict, struggle. There seems to be evil in the world and goodness. There seems to be this continual battle between light and dark. And that's how the manifested forms come into being and are perceived through our individual understandings as good and bad, as right and wrong, and then all the infinite number of greys between those two black and white bookends. And so we find ourselves having to navigate that and find the truth of our own life, whilst we see life unfolding in a chaotic and apparently random and often cruel way. And we then try to ask ourselves, how can that be all one? How can that be this one underlying reality that is playing out in front of us? Because when we're in the world, we can't help but be drawn positively to some things and have an aversion to other things. That is being human. And we want to bring peace and love into the world. But how do we do that when we're facing the opposite of that? Maybe in our immediate environment, and certainly on a global scale we see that playing out. And there aren't any answers to this, but we can ask questions, and those questions, I believe, should be answered by inquiring within. Not by looking for answers in the external world. We have to enter that external world and play in that theatre and do the best we can, and that is the struggle of life. But those deeper questions are in the essential self, the Advaita Vedanta position that Sankara was pointing to through the ancient Upanishad texts, the essential part of our nature that is separate from what is happening and playing out in the world. And that is to be found deep within every human soul when it merges with Brahman, and there is a resonance and a deeper realization that we aren't this mortal form that has attachments and desires and that suffers, but we are beyond that. There is something eternal. There is something ever present, immutable, undefinable, but beautiful in that space within every human heart.